Counselor.
Shabbat Shalom. Good to
Shabbat
see you.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Ha, ha, ha.
I got special permission. Special dispensation. Who's watching? That's what the Zoom camera was.
I'm missing.
Oh, okay, we're live on Facebook.
Great. Have you seen any of these? Oh, there are the cards. I see. Okay. Okay. I need Rishon and Shlishi. There we go. Finding a full set of these. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We're going to begin our service this morning. We invite you to turn to page 61 in your Siddur. We welcome some of our guests who are here. It's nice to see you, Tzvi, and company. And we are going to begin on page 61 with Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani lefanecha Melech Chai v'kayam shechazarta b'nishmati bechem la Rabba emunatecha Rabba emunatecha Rabba emunatecha ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenatecha Yisrael ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenatecha Yisrael. Page 63. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. invite you, if you're able to rise, to turn to page 65 as we continue now with Birkot HaShachar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasech v'ivina lavchin ven yom uven laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani ben chorim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozei Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, otei Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten li ayev koah. We'll invite you to be seated as we continue page 65. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam. Uhutneno yom v'chol yom l'cheinu l'chesed rachamim, beinecha u'bnei kol re'em tegalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai, gomel chasadim tovim li'amo Yisrael. Yirat zomei lefanecha. Ben shuhu ben brit u'ben she'eno ben brit. V'anshe Hashem. Aval ha'nachnu amcha b'nei britecha b'nei avcha. Lefichach אנחנו חייבים להודות לך. אשרינו מה טוב חלקנו ומה נעים גורלנו ומה יפה ירושתנו. אשרינו שאנחנו משכימים מערבים ערב ובוקר ואומרים פעמיים בכל יום. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. קדש את שמך מקדישי שמך וקדש את שמך בעולמך ושועתך תרים ותגביהך כהרננו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש את שמך ברבים.
Amen.
Turn ahead with me to page 72 as we continue the service now with Psalm 92, the Psalm for Shabbat. Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Shabo Beit HaMikdash Mishmor Shir Yom HaShabbat Tov Lahodot L'Adonai U'Lazamer L'Shimcha Hayom. Magadlu Mahasecha Haya Me'oram ku machshevotecha. Magadlu Mahasecha Haya Me'oram ku machshevotecha. עוד ינבון וסבא, דשנים רננים יהיו, להגיד כי אשר אדוני צורי, ולא עוולה תבוא. We'll turn ahead to page 81 as we join now in Psalm 30, page 81. מזמור שיר חנוכת הבית לדוד, המלכת כנתלתני, ולא שימחת אויבי לי. זמלו רניים חסידם. כי רגע באפו חיים ברצונו, ואני אמרתי בשלבי. Shema Adonai v'chaneni Adonai hayeh ozer li Shema Adonai v'chaneni Adonai hayeh ozer li Shema Adonai v'chaneni Adonai hayeh ozer li Ha'hafachta mispri macholi pitachta saki v'tasreni simcha L'man yishmecha chava v'lo yidom Adonai Elohai le'olam odeka. We'll invite those in the process of mourning or observing yahrzeit to join with me, both on the Zoom and here, page 82, Kaddish Tom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yalmad divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach li'olam omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata da'amiran v'yalma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. If you're able to rise, page 83, Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam Baruch hu Baruch oseh v'reshit Baruch omer v'oseh Baruch ozer u'mekayem Baruch merachem haaretz Baruch merachem al habriot Baruch mishalem sachar tov l'reah Baruch ha'elad v'kayam la'netzach Baruch bodeh u'matzil Baruch Shemo. Yachid chehol melech mishubach v'radet shemo hagadol Baruch Adonai melech mehulal v'tishbacho.
Amen.
Please be seated. We'll continue now on page 92 as we continue with the great Hallel, page 92. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Elohe ha'Elohim ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Adonai ha'adonim ki le'olam li'olam chasto li'oseh nifla'ot gedolot levado ki le'olam chasto li'oseh hashamayim b'tvuna ki le'olam chasto l'roka ha'aretz al hamayim Ki le'olam chasto li'oseh orim gedolim Ki le'olam chasto et hashemesh lememshelet ba'ayom Ki le'olam chasto et הירח וכוכבים לממשלות בלילה, כי לעולם חסדו. למכה מצרים בבחוריהם, כי כי לעולם חסדו, ויוצא ישראל מתוכם, כי לעולם חסדו, ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה, כי לעולם חסדו, ליחזר ים סוף לגזר הרים, כי לעולם חסדו, והעביר ישראל בתוכו, כי לעולם חסדו, וניער ברו וחילו בים סוף, כי לעולם חסדו, למוליך עמו במדבר, כי לעולם חסדו, למכה מלכים גדולים, כי לעולם חסדו, ויהרוג מלכים אדירים, כי לעולם חסדו, לסיחון המלך האמורי, כי לעולם חסדו, ולהוג המלך הבשן, כי לעולם חסדו, ונתן ארצם לנחלה, כי לעולם חסדו, נחלה לישראל עבדו, כי לעולם חסדו, שבשבילנו זכר לנו, כי לעולם חסדו, ויפרקנו מצרינו, כי לעולם חסדו, הנותן לחם לכל בשר, כי לעולם חסדו, הודו לאל השמיים, כי לעולם חסדו, הנותן לחם לכל בשר, כי לעולם חסדו, הודו לאל השמיים, כי לעולם חסדו. Page 96, Ashrei Yehoshvei Veitecha Od Hallelujah, Od Hallelujah Selah Hashem Shkachalo, Hashem Sharonai Lo Gadol Adonai Melamo Zechram פותח את ידיך מסביר לך רצון רצון ירב ועשה תהילת אדוני ידבר פי ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. Hallelujah. Continuing page 100, Psalm 150. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekacham, hallelujah, hallelujah, Berki Ahuzom, hallelujah, 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 Vigvorav, hallelujah, hallelujah, Kerav Golom, hallelujah, 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 Teka
shofar, hallelu, hallelu, v'nevel v'chinor, hallelu, 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 v'tov u'machol, hallelu, hallelu, v'minim ve'ugav, hallelu, 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 v'tzil tzalei shama, hallelu, hallelu, v'tzil tzalei truah. Kol haneshama tehallel, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallel, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallel, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael Seneflot Levado, Baruch Shem Kvado Le'alam. V'yamelech Vado et Kol Haaretz. Amen v'amen. If you're able to rise, page 101, as we prepare Shirat Hayam. Vayevarech David Enei. Ve'alam Yad Olam Lecha. Atahu Adonai Elohim asher b'charta b'Avram v'hotzeto me'or kasdim v'hisamta shmo Avraham u'matzatot le'avo ne'eman lefanecha v'hayam bakata lifnehem v'yavru v'toch hayam v'yavasha v'yadrov ha'mishlachta b'msalot k'mo even v'mayim azim v'yashanu V'haya Yisrael hayad gedola asher asa Adonai b'Mitzrayim v'yir'u ha'am et Adonai v'yaminu Adonai v'Moshe abdo asher shemoshe Ozi v'zimrat yah avayehi l'ishua Ozi, Ozi, v'zimrat yah, v'yehili l'ishua. Ozi, v'zimrat yah, v'yehili l'ishua. Ozi v'zimrat yah v'yehili l'ishua. Zay livian ve'hu al v'yim markavot bara v'chelo v'yamzu Yimin charnai derchok yimin charav v'yeh tzalo gavarim Mechamocha belem mechamocha Adonai imloch le'olam vahed Adonai imloch le'olam vahed Ki l'Adonai hamlucha Moshe v'goyim v'alu Moshim barsil nichbot et har Esav v'yital Adonai hamlucha v'haya Adonai lemelcha kol ha'aretz v'yom hahu Adonai echad u'shemo echad. May be seated. A brief kavanah before we conclude Pesukei de Zimra from Rabbi Shefa Gold. And I want to just share this intention as we come to this parasha, which is fundamentally the parasha that begins our freedom as a Jewish people. So the blessing of this week's parasha, of Parshat Bo, is the blessing of freedom. We take the first step out of Mitzrayim, out of the narrow confines, the narrow spaces, and we become conscious as we journey
and we begin the dream of awakening from being oppressed. Freedom is not merely freedom from in Jewish tradition. It's not only freedom from oppression and suffering and servitude. It's also about freedom to be in a direct relationship with the Holy One of Blessing, with God who is our liberator. And in order to be in a relationship with God, that means we also have to be willing to serve the Holy One of Blessing, to be of service, and to recognize that our freedom is not just being able to do what we wish to do, but it's being free to serve God. At the beginning of this portion, God speaks to Moshe, and if we think about Moshe as the prophet within, God says, "Bo," God says, "Come on in. I'm waiting for you inside the heart of Pharaoh." The heart of Pharaoh, if we read this as an allegory, is inside each one of us. It's the place that's grown heavy with the weight of life's experience. It's the place inside ourselves that is hardened. It's the part of us that has become cynical. The parts of ourselves that are laden with fear and with unhealed grief. Through this heart of Pharaoh, you must come if you are to know me, if you are to find your true freedom. There's a midrash about jealous angels who are asked to hide the spark of the divine in this world. One angel says, "Let's put it atop the highest mountain." "No," says another, "the human is very ambitious. He'll find it there." "Well, then let's bury it beneath the deepest sea." That won't work either, another angel chimes in. "The human is very resourceful. She will find it even there." After a final moment's thought, the wisest angel says, "I know. Let's put the spark of the divine inside the human heart. They will never look there." And so the spark of God is hidden in the heart of Pharaoh, where we are kept out by the heaviness that is accumulated, by the hardness that we meant for our protection. But sometimes that hidden spark within each and every one of us will say, "Bo, come on in. I have been waiting for you for a very long time." Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Page 104, we'll conclude Psukei de Zimra with Nishmat before we turn it over to the Chazan. By the way, I was telling the Chazan, probably no one missed him more last week than I did, since I told him how much I had a very long Shabbos nap after last week. Page 104. Nishmat kol chai tivarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu rov kol basar ilufinu maleh shira kayam ulashal nenrina mitzrayim galtan Adonai Eloheinu mitavadim Nehalel chan shabecha chan afarecha nevarech et shem kodshecha ka'amur leDavid barchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol kravai et shem kodsho ha'el b'tatzumohot uzecha hagadol b'chvod shemecha hagibor lenetzach v'nora v'nohorotecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisam. Cantor continues. Page 105, Shochenad.
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chaturenu tzadikim Adonai lai sharim navadila b'fi sharim tithalal v'divrei tzadikim titbarach ובלשון חסידים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ומקלות הרביבות עמך בית ישראל בן פרק כן מכל דור ודור, שכן חובת כל איסורים לפניך, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, להודות, להלל, לשבח, להדר, לברך, לקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות, דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך.
We invite you to rise, page 106.
ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו.
ישתבח שמך ליד מלכנו.
אל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ.
ברכות ודורמת העבר עולם.
עוז ממשלה.
אדון נפלא תבוכה בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולם.
ברכות ודורמת מעתה מיד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל המלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות, אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים.
אמן.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
בלמד דברי קירותי ומלך מלכותי, בחייכון ומכון ובחיית כל בית ישראל, בגדה וזכריו, ויאמרו אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם עולמי עמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפואר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה. בריחו לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן ביעלמה, ואמרו אמן. את אדוני המבורך. ברוך המבורך לעולם ועד. We continue, page 107. We invite you to be seated. Baruch Adonai.
ברוך אתה אלוהים העולם, יוסר וברי חושך, חוצי שלום ובורא את הכל. הכל יודוך והכל ישבחוך, והכל יורים קדוש כל נפש. המעילה רצפדרים עליך. ברחמיך רבי ברחם עלינו עדות. אין כי ירכנו בעולם הזה, ואין זאתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא. אפס בלתך גולם לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים. page 108. אל אדון על כל המעשים, ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה, גודלו וטובו מלא עולם, דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו. המתגאה על חיות הקודש, ונדר בכבוד על המרכבה, זכות ומישור לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו. טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו, יצרם בדעת ובינה ובשכל, כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל. מלאי מזיב ומפיקים הנוגה לעזיבם בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם בששים בבואם, עושים בהם הרצון קונם, פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמו, צולה ורינה לזכר מלכותו. קרא לשמש ויזרח אור, רב התקין צורת הלבנה, שבח נותנים לו וכל צבא מרום, תפארת וגדולה, סרפים ויופנים וחיות הקודש.
Page 109.
לאשר שבת מכל המעשים בהם השביעי. עוד קרא ליום השבת זה שבח. טוב להודות אדוני, לפיכך יפעל. שמך נא אלוהינו. ויאמר אור שעשית יפררו הסלע תתפרק צורנו מלכנו וגואלנו בורא קדושים משתבח שם כל מלכנו יוצר משרתים כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים בהם אווירה רצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה, ובטהרה בשירה, ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים פארים ארצים הקדישים, וממליכים את שם האל המלך הגדול הגיבור והנורא הקדוש הוא וכולם מקבלים עליהם למלכות שמיים זה מזה ונורים רשות זה לזה להקדיש אותם בנחת רוח בשפה ברורה ונימה קדושה כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. ועפרים בחיות הקודש, ברעש גדול מנשאים השרפים, לימתם משבחים ויאמרים. כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ליאל ברוך למולדתנו, למלך החי וקיים. בעל מלחמות זורע צדקות מצמיח ישועות אור חדש על ציון תאיר 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 ונזכה כולנו מהרה ליאורה ונזכה כולנו מהרה ליאורה ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות
אמן
אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו חמלה גדולה ותורה חמלת עלינו אבינו מלכנו בעבור אבותינו שבטחו בך אבינו מלכנו אתם מלכו כחיים כאילו
ותן בליבנו להבין להשכיל לשמו ללמוד אמן
והייר עינינו בתורתך ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך ויחל לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך לא נבוש לעולם ועד לא נבוש לעולם ועד כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו נגילה ונשמחה נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך ואבינו לשלום מירבה כנפות הארץ ותוליכנו כממיעוט לארצנו כי לבוא אל ישועת אתה ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע סלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך ביחד ביאהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוקר בימו ישראל ויאמר שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעד ויאהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך והיה אם שמעו תשמע מצוות השם ונתתי את
ישמרו לכם פן יבטל לבבכם
את השמיים לא יהיה ושמתם את דברי אל לבבכם לנפשכם
ושמתם את דברי אל לבבכם
בשבתך בביתך לך בדרך שוכבך ובקומך וכתבתם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לתת להם כי מהשמיים על הארץ ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ויעשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנה פתיל תכלת והיה לכם לציצית וריתם אותו וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תדורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריכם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת
ויציב נחבק
לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים וכיסו נכון ומלכותו באמונתו ליד קיימת ודבריו חיים וקיימים נאמנים על אבותינו ועלינו על בנינו על הראשונים ולאחרונים לעברתו וקיים עלינו
יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פותרנו מצלנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך.
אמת שאדוני בנים לאבותינו מה כן מלך אבותינו גואל אבותינו יוסר ישועתנו פנים מצלנו משמך אין אלוהים זולתך.
Page 114.
עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם מגן מושיע לבניהם אחריכם בכל דור בדור. ברוך אמת אתה הוא אדון עמך אלך מלך גואל ומושיע ממצרים ידענו אלוהינו תהילה אלוהינו ברוך ומבורך משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נער בקודש תהילות אוסף אלה שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובדי קדומך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמות קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Join together, the Amidah, page 153.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל אלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל עליון גומל חסדים הטובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור עולם אדוני מקיים מתים אתה רב ליושיע משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם מקלקל חיים בחסד מקיים מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ברופא קולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר וכמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לקחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מקיים המתים
נקדש וגמרם שם שמקדישים אותה בשמי מרום ככתוב בנביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר
נקדש את שמך בלנקי שם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום ככתוב בנביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות לכל הארץ כבודו
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו אז בכל רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים הכל אז בכל רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים הכל מתנסים לעומת השרפים מתנסים לעומת השרפים מתנסים לעומת השרפים לעומתם ברוך יאמרו
ברוך כבר אדוני ממקומו
ברוך כבר אדוני ממקומו ממקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך מתי תמלוך תמלוך בציון בקרוב בימינו לעולם ועד לעולם ועד תשכון תתקדש ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך לדור ודור ולנצח נצחים V'yenenu tirena malchutecha, kadavar hamur v'shirei uzecha, al David Mashiach tzidekecha.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, Ledor Vador, Hallelujah.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, Ledor Vador, Hallelujah. Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagide Kodelecha, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagide Kodelecha, Oletzach Netzachim, Kedushatecha Nakdish, Kedushatecha Nakdish, Veshivchacha Eloheinu, Mipinu lo yamush le'olam ha'ed. Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagide Godelecha, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagide Godelecha, Ki emelech gadol v'kadosh ata, v'kadosh v'kadosh ata, Ki emelech gadol v'kadosh ata, v'kadosh v'kadosh ata. Baruch ata Adonai HaKadosh. Yismach Moshe Mot. וכתוב בהם ליש.
Those of you who are still davening, please continue to do so. Those of you who have concluded should turn to page 138 as we continue with Kaddish Shalem.
Amen. Bialemati v'rakirutei v'amlik malchutei b'chayechon v'mekon v'chayet kol beit Yisrael b'agala v'zakariva v'meru amen. Eshmei Rabba mevora le'olam ulam me'amaya yitbarach. יתברך וישתבח את הואר ותרמה ותנשא ותהדר ותהי ותהלל שמי דקודשה. בריחו לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ושפחתה ונחמתה דמירן ולמה ומרו. אמן. תתקבץ ותכון ובאו תכון לכל ישראל קודם אבוהון דבישמיה ומרו. אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ומרו. אמן. עושה שלום ממרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
We want to pause briefly and wish each and every one of you Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We're glad that you are with us here, both in this room, and we are glad that those of you who are watching on our Zoom are with us as well. We want to welcome our guests. We have some guests here this morning. We want to say hi to Svi Waxman. And Svi, as many of you know, is the son of Rabbi Josh Waxman and Amy Kahn. And Josh, you want to introduce your friends who are with you? Are these your Nativ friends?
Yeah, Jack, Catherine, Yona David. That's Long Island, Yona, Minnesota.
Right. And wait, Yona, your father's Rabbi Alexander Davis, yes? Nice. I think that my future son-in-law grew up in your father's synagogue. Orly and Jeff Kahn's son, Ben Kahn. I don't know if you remember the Kahns or know them. Yeah. So all the Jewish connections right here with us. So thanks. It's nice to have you guys here with us visiting. And we're happy that all of you who are watching on the Zoom are watching. We're going to continue with the Torah service. And I'll have a couple of words to say about the Torah. We'll do some Torah reading, and then we have actually a little Torah conversation we'll do a little bit later. Page 139 of your Siddur.
מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור אדוני מלך אדוני מלך אדוני מלוך לעולם ועד אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן Adonai יברך את עמו בשלום. אברך עמים היטיב ברצונך את ציון. תבנה קומות ירושלים, תבנה קומות ירושלים. כי בך למעלה תחנו מלך אל רם ונישא אדון עולמים. ויהי בנשוא אהרון ויאמר משה אדוני ויפוצו אויביך וינוסו משנאיך מפניך כי מציון תצא תורה כי מציון תצא תורה ודבר אדוני מירושלים ברוך שנתן תורה תורה ברוך שנתן תורה תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו וינרחת וישווה קדישה קדישה יקירה אנא אמר תושבחן וינרחת וישווה קדישה קדישה יקירה אנא אמר תושבחן יהי ראווה קודמך ותפתח ליבי דאורייתא ותשלין משלין דליבי וליבה דכל עמך ישראל לטוב לחיים ולשלום.
Continuing now responsively, page 141.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, kadosh shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadol Adonai iti, Urma shemo yachdav.
Adonai HaGedola,
והגבורה, והתפארת, והנצח וכפות. יכול בשמיים ובארץ, יכול בשמיים ובארץ. אדוני הממלכה, והמתנשא לכל ראש, רוממו, רוממו. אדוני אלוהינו, וישתחוו לאדום רגליו קדוש הוא. רוממו, אדוני אלוהינו, וישתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו.
Please be seated. Again, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to all. So we are back in Shmot, and the cycle of the plagues continue. And so generally we think of the plagues kind of crescendoing into the most awful. Certainly the last of the 10 plagues is horrific in scale and scope, the death of the firstborn, Makat Bechorot. So we might think that, let's say, the 9th plague would be kind of moving in that crescendo of awfulness. Does anyone remember what the 9th plague is? Dr. Kelson. Darkness. Choshech. So the question might be, compared to boils and cattle disease and turning the Nile into blood and frogs, and, darkness doesn't seem that bad, really, because the antidote to darkness is to light a candle, right? You can do something about darkness. But what we read in the Torah about this darkness is that Lo kamu ish mitachtav. The darkness was so thick that like a person could not move from underneath oneself. One was essentially stuck in a kind of depth of darkness. And there is a phrase, vayimesh choshech. It was a darkness that was mamash. It was like a darkness that you could feel, a physical force, almost. And as you think about that concept of darkness that's so thick that you can't possibly move or move around in, it reminds us of a kind of darkness that is unfortunately incredibly common in our contemporary world, which is the plague of darkness that comes from clinical depression, and even a sense of anxiety that we can have. And I want to say that, we're coming on 2 years of COVID. And we know that we're hearing and we're reading about the fact that there's been a kind of, not only has there been a pandemic of a virus, but there has been an epidemic of anxiety that has been caused by this virus, particularly among young people, and particularly among those who have been prevented from being in school regularly. I know that there are some of these young people in this room who might have decided to put off plans to do things for a year or two because of all of the restrictions that COVID has placed on us. So the question is, what is the antidote to darkness when we feel darkness? And I would argue, and it's particularly difficult for when you're talking about children, because anxiety is not something that this translates to. But the antidote to darkness for many of us as adults is the capacity to feel wonder, the capacity to feel gratitude, even in the midst of difficult times. And I think that if all of us think about it, we are aware of the fact that as difficult as this time has been, there's so much that we have to be grateful for. Not only the speed in which a vaccine was produced for this, but the technology that has allowed us to stay connected to each other during these times when we couldn't be together. And we've talked over and over again about the small acts of daily heroism of people who have served those who are suffering from the virus, our healthcare workers. So in dark times, I think that part of what we are to understand as religious people is that part of how we give way to darkness is to remember that there is still much to be grateful for, and that there are many wonders in this world. Not the least of them is that we have a vaccine that is keeping many, many of us alive and safe. We begin this week's Torah reading towards the end of the Parasha, beginning verse 29 of chapter 12 on page 387 of your Chumashim. Yazor v'gem v'shilach osim bo v'nomar amen. Hakol havu godel utnu chavod la Torah ya'amod. Yaakov ben Aaron Halevi Baruch shenatan Torah l'mershu b'kedushato v'atem abdikim b'Adonai Elohechem chayim kolchem hayom.
Baruch et Adonai HaBarach.
Baruch Adonai barach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'charbanu mikol ha'amim v'na'atamonu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayehi bakatzi halayla v'Adonai hikachol bechor בארץ מצרים מבכור פרעה היושב על כיסו עד בכור השבי אשר בבית הבור וכל בכור בהמה ויקום פרעה לילה הוא וכל עבדיו וכל מצרים ותהי צעקה גדולה במצרים כי אין בית אשר אין שם מת ויקרא למשה ולאהרון לילה ויאמר קומו צאו מתוך עמי גם אתם גם בני ישראל ולכו עבדו את אדוני כדברכם גם צונכם גם בקרכם כהו כאשר דיברתם ולכו וברכתם גם אותי.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah ebet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ya'amod Tzvi. What's your middle name? Tzvi Hadar ben Harav. Yehoshua ben Yahuva Aliyah Shniah. Continuing now on page 387, verse 33.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach.
Baruch Adonai barach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai barach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'charbanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai נותן התורה.
Amen.
אמן. ותחזק מצרים על העם, למהר לשלחה מן הארץ, כי אמרו כולנו מתים. וישם את בצקו טרם יחמץ, משערותם צרורות בסמלותם על שכמם, ובני ישראל עשו כדבר משה. וישאלו ממצרים כלי כסף וכלי זהב ושמאלות. ואדוני נתן את חנם בעיני מצרים, ושאלו וינצלו את מצרים.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נטפת אמת וחיי עולם אתה בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Continuing verse 37, page 388. Ya'amod Yaakov ben Moshe Aliyah Shlishit.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן. ויסעו בני ישראל מרמסס סוכותה, 600,000 רגלי הגברים לבד מטף, וגם ערב רב עלה איתם, וצאן ובקר מקנה כבד מאוד. ויופו את הבצק אשר הוציאו ממצרים, עוגות מצות כי לא חמץ, כי גורשו ממצרים ולא יכלו להתממע, וגם צידה לא עשו להם. ומשה בני ישראל אשר ישבו במצרים 30 שנה ו400 שנה, ויהי מקץ 30 שנה ו400 שנה, ויהי בעצם היום הזה יצאו כל צבאות אדוני מארץ מצרים לאל שימורים הוא לאדוני להוציאם מארץ מצרים. הוא הלילה הזה לאדוני שימורים לכל בני ישראל לדורותם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam atah b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ya'amod. Oh, Jeff is okay. Ya'amod. Yonah ben Harav Alexander Vester Miriam Aliyah Revihit. Jeff Nussbaum will be reading Torah for us. We are on the 4th Aliyah, page 389, verse 43.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai Moshe v'Aharon Zot hutata pasach, kol b'nechar lo yachol boho, v'chol eved ish miknat kasef, umata oto al yochal boho, toshav v'sachir lo yochal boho, b'vayit echad yeyachel, lo totzi min habayit, min habesar chutza, ve'etzem lo tishperu voho, kol adat Yisrael ya'asu oto, v'chi yagor idcha ger, ve'asa pesach l'Adonai, himo lo chol zachar, ve'az yigrav lasot, ve'hayak hezrach ha'aretz, v'chol harel lo yochal boho, Torah dechad yihye le'asrach, v'lager Agar b'tochechem, v'yasu kol b'nei Yisrael, ka'asher tziva Adonai, et Moshe v'et Aharon ken asuhu, v'yihi be'etzem hayom hazeh, Hotzi Adonai et b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzivrotam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah.
Amen. We say Asher Koch to Jeff on reading Torah for us. You're not continuing, right? Very good. You get to say Yasher Koch again. The fifth Aliyah continues the opening of chapter 13, page 391. Ta'amod, Sar Tamarbat, Avram Mosheva, Basha Rivka, Chamishit.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaBarach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'yedaber Adonai Moshe le'mor, kadesh lichol bechor, petach kol rechem b'vnei Yisrael, Ba'adam uvavhema lihu, Vayomer Moshe, El ha'am zechor, Et hayom hazeh asher yetzatem miMitzrayim mibeit avadim, ki bechozek yad hotzi Adonai etchem mizeh, v'lo yeachel hametz, hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh haviv.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Sixth Aliyah continues, verse 5, page 392. Ta'amod. Wait, same. Rachelea bat Mordechai Pesha Aliyah Shishit.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaBarach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'hayachi yiviecha Adonai al eretz haknani, v'hachiti v'hamori, v'hachavi v'hayevusi, asher nishba l'rotecha l'teitach eretz zavat chalav udvash v'avodah, et havodah hazot b'chodesh hazeh, shivat yamim tochal matzah, uv'yom hashvi'i chag l'Adonai, matzot yeyachel et shivat hayamim, ולא יראה לך חמץ, ולא יראה לך סור בכל גבולך, והגדת לבנך ביום ההוא לאמור בעבור זה, עשה אדוני לי ביצי ממצרים, והיה לך עוד על ידך ולזיכרון בין עיניך למען תהיה תורת אדוני בפיך, כי ביד חזקה הוציאך אדוני ממצרים, ושמרת את החוקה הזאת למועדה מימים ימימה.
Yasher Koach.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. So our wonderful Torah reader, Jeff Nussbaum, in case I didn't recognize him with his mask on originally, but Jeff is the husband of Jan Nussbaum, our wonderful new family engagement coordinator. And Jeff, you are invited to read Torah any and every week you would like to at Beth Sholom congregation. Yasher Koach. Seventh Aliyah continues now, verse 11, page 393 of your Chumash. Ya'amdu. And Shua Verve Esther Malka Ve'et. Meyer Wolf Ben. Shmuel Lippe. V'chaya. Aliyah Shvihit.
Baruch et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'haya ki yiva'acha Adonai el eretz hakinaani, kasher nishba lecha ve'la'avotecha untana lach, ve'ha'avarta chol peterechem l'Adonai, v'chol peter sheger behema, asher yihye lecha hazecharim l'Adonai, v'chol peter chamor tivne v'seh, v'im lo tifde ba'arafto, v'chol bechor adam bevanecha tifde, v'haya ki yishalecha v'necha machar lemor mazot, ve'amarta elav bechozek yad, hotianu Adonai mimitzrayim מבית עבדים, ויהי כי הקשה פרעה ושלחנו, ויהרוג אדוני כל בכור בארץ מצרים, מבכור אדם ויד בכור בהמה. על כן אני זובח לאדוני כל פטר רחם על זכרים, וכל בכור בני אפדה, והיה לאות על ידך ולטוטפות בין עיניך, כי בחוזק יד הוציאני אדוני ממצרים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And we're going to pause briefly and invite and ask God to bring healing to those who are in need of healing. We'll begin the Mishaberach L'Cholim. Leave some time for some silence for you to fill that silence with the names, faces of those in your lives in need of healing. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachav Leah Hu Yivarech v'Yirapeh et Cholim et. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleim Hachzikam Rapotam V'Yishlach Lahem Eira Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf B'toch Shar Cholei Yisrael Shabbat Milizok Hashta Bagalav Izman Kariv V'Namar Amen. We're going to invite you, if you're able, to rise to do so as we continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba Yamad divrach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon yomechon uv'chayedecho Beit Yisrael B'hagala uv'izman kariv yimeru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach Yolam le'almei almaya yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha leila min kol birchata v'shirata
Tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'yalema v'yimeru
Amen. You may be seated. The maftir is found, verse 14, page 393. Ya'amod. Eliyahu ben Ephraim Chanoch Halevi ve'eh. Rachel Chinda maftir.
Baruch et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. V'haya ki yiviach Adonai el eretz oh, sorry, wrong spot. והיה כי שלך בנך מחר לאמור מזאת ואמרת אליו בחוזק יד הוציאנו אדוני ממצרים מבית עבדים ויהי כי הקשה פרעה לשלחנו ויהרוג אדוני כל בכור בארץ מצרים ובכור אדם ויד בכור בהמה על כן אני זובח לאדוני כל פטר רחם על זכרים וכל בכור בני אפדה והיה לאות על ידך ותותפות בין עיניך כי בחוזק יד הוציאני אדוני ממצרים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. If you're able to rise, we invite you to do so as the Torah will now be lifted and dressed. V'zot haTorah, v'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe לפני בני ישראל, אז Adonai Mitzion, Tetzei Torah, Hashem Yerushalayim, Baruch Shenatan, Torah le'amo Yisrael, Baruch Shenatan, Torah le'amo Yisrael, B'kedushato,
כי
כי
מציון
מציון,
תצא
Tetzei
תורה
Torah,
ודבר השם מירושלים כי מציון תצא תורה ודבר השם
Hashem
מירושלים.
Please be seated. The Haftarah that Steve will be chanting for us this morning comes from the prophet Jeremiah. And once again, here in the Haftarah, just as we saw last week in our Haftarah from Ezekiel, the Israelites are in exile. The first temple has been destroyed. The parallels between an oppressed Israelite nation, oppressed by a pharaoh in Egypt, is also happening here in this parasha. And ultimately, the theme of Jeremiah is that those who have power in the moment, those who are arrogant and who use their power in ways that affirm their arrogance, will ultimately be destroyed. Here, Jeremiah prophesies the fall of the Pharaoh in Egypt by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Once again, this is really a meditation on the ultimate folly of human arrogance. You'll find the Haftarah beginning on the bottom of page 395.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bochar b'nviim tovim v'ratzah v'divreihem v'nemonim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'nvi'eho emet v'tzedek. Hadavar asher diber Adonai el Yirmiyahu hanavi lavo Nebuchadnezzar melech Bovel lehakot et eretz Mitzrayim hagidu v'Mitzrayim v'hashmiu v'migdol v'hashmiu v'nof uvtach panches Imru hit yatzei v'chochein loch ki och loch erev sevivecha madu anischach abirecha lo omad ki Adonai hadafo hirba koshel gam nofal ishel reyehu vayomru kumo v'nashuvo el ameinu v'el eretz moladetenu mipnei cherev hayonah karu sham paro melech mitzrayim sha'on he'evir hamoed chayani ne'um hamelech Adonai tzvaot shemo Ki ketovar beharim uchachar mehel bayom yovo Kalegola asiloch yoshevet bat mitzrayim Ki nof l'shama tiyeh v'nitz tah mein yoshev Egla yefefiyah mitzrayim keretz mitzafon bavo Gam sechirecha v'kirba ke'eglei marbek ki gam hema hivnu nasu yachdov lo am omadu ki yom edom ba alehem eit pekudatam kola kanachash yelech ki v'chayil yelechu uvkardumot ba'ulach kechot vehe etzim kortu yara ne'um Adonai ki lo yechoker ki
Ki rabu me'ar beh ve'ein lochem mispor. Hovi Shabbat Mitzrayim nitna bi'adam tafon. Omar Adonai Tzavaot Elohei Yisrael Hineni Foked El Amon Mino V'al Paro V'al Mitzrayim V'al Elohecha V'al Melohecha V'al Paro V'al Habotchim Bo Untatim V'ad Mevakshei Nafsham Uvyad Nebuchadrezzar Melech Bovel Uvyad Avodov V'acharechein Tishkon Kime Kedem Neum Adonai V'atol Tiro Avdi Yaakov V'altechat Yisrael Ki Hineni Moshiach Be'rochok V'yad zaracha me'eretz shivyam V'shov Yaakov V'shokat V'sho'an V'ein macharid Atol tiro Avdi Yaakov Ni'um Adonai Ki itcho oni Ki esecholo V'chol hagoyim Asher Hidachticha shomo V'yodcha lo esecha lo V'yisarticha la mishpot V'nakei lo anakecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam Tzur kol holamim, tzadik b'chol hadorot, hoel anemonim, haomer v'yoseh, hamdaber u'kayim, shekol devorov emet v'tzedek. Nemon atohu Adonai Eloheinu v'nemonim devorecha, v'davar echad midvorecha, v'achar lo yoshuv rekom, ki el melech nemon v'rachamon atah. Baruch atah Adonai, Hoel hanemon b'chol rochav. Rachem al Tzion ki hi veit chayenu, v'laluvat nefesh toshia b'mirov yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai, mesameach Tzion b'vonecha. Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi abdecha. V'laluvat nefesh toshia b'mirov yameinu. B'mirov yameinu libenu. Al kiso lo yeshev zor v'lo yinchalu od acherim et kvodo. Ki v'shem kotshekah nishbata lo shalo yikben neiro li'olam voed. Baruch atah Adonai Magen David. Al haTorah v'al havodah v'al hanviim v'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatato lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lechavod ultiforet. Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim loch umvorchim otoch yitbarach shimcha b'ficha chai tamid li'olam voed. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat.
66th anniversary. Wow. Mazel tov. Yasher koach. I didn't realize we were doing an anniversary of a bar mitzvah. All right, that's wonderful. We're going to invite people to turn back to their Sidurim, and we're going to continue now with first the prayer for our country. And we are going to ask Don Agris to lead us, page 148. And Rena, I believe you will be doing the prayer for the state of Israel. We invite you to rise as we continue.
Let's join together a prayer for our country. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insight from your Torah. They may administer all affairs of state fairly. That peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may abide in our midst. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony, to banish hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. May this land under your providence be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
Page 149. Avinu Shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, Hagen Aleha be'evrat chastecha, Ufros Aleha Sukat Shlomecha, Ushlach Orcha ve'amitcha l'rasheha, Sareha ve'yoatzeha, V'taknem be'etza tova milfanecha, Chazek et yedei Mekina, Eretz Kodshenu, V'hanchilenu Elohim Shua, V'ateret nitzachon te'atrem, V'natata shalom ba'aretz, V'simchat olam liyoshveha, V'nomar Amen.
We'll continue now as we remain standing as we prepare to return the Sefer Torah, the bottom of page 154.
Eskayimehi lama kazikimeba vetomechecha meyushar derachecha darkei noam vechol nativoteha shalom Ashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Kadesh, Kadesh Yameinu Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
Please be seated. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I don't know if we're going to, Chazan, I'm going to ask some people to come up, so I don't know if this mic is going to interfere with. So I want to begin by just explaining that we talked about this last night, but the first commandment given to the Jewish people is from this week's Torah portion. And does anyone remember what that first commandment is? The calendar. You were listening, Rabbi. You were listening. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, Rosh Chodashim. This is the first month that you're counting. It's the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people as a people. And the question of why this should be the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, there's much commentary. But most of our sages say that because this is the first commandment given to a people about to become a free people. We are about to leave slavery and servitude. We are about to cross the sea. We are about to be able to come to Sinai and to be a free people. And the tradition is saying in this statement that the first command we have is to count the months in recognition of our freedom, is that the ultimate goal in our lives is freedom. Freedom from oppression, but freedom, as we have said a little bit earlier, to take on responsibility. And that's why I would argue that the Jewish people for the last few centuries have flocked to countries that are democratic in nature, countries where Jews were mostly given the right, the freedom to be able to worship as they saw fit and to be able to freely practice what it means to be Jewish. As we are all aware, because it's been saturated in the media, we have just come to the one-year anniversary of the events of January 6th, the first time since the War of 1812 that we saw the peaceful transfer of power in this country actually threatened for the first time in close to 200 years. And I'm bringing up this anniversary not to have us engage in a political conversation and to assess blame, because that will ultimately, of course, lead us quickly into our partisan corners, which is not the goal of a religious community. But I bring this up because as a religious leader, I want to acknowledge that I am, for the first time in my adult life, I'm frightened for this country. And the rage that is bubbling up in so many corners of this country, and the fear that I think is becoming more rampant, and the erosions of some of the norms of a democratic society. And so this morning, I asked Joe and Val to hand out a sheet with 18 quotes on the nature of democracy, citizenship, freedom, and mutual responsibility. You will find sources from the left and sources from the right on this sheet, sources from Democrats, Republicans, from people who are secular, people who are religious, Jewish sources, non-Jewish sources. What I want to say very clearly is that these are sources that are not strategies. They simply represent values. They represent values. And my goal is to be able to read these sources out loud and on our Zoom, and to ask people after reading these sources to have a brief conversation with each other. The goal of the exercise will be to say, tell which one of these values, or which one or two of these values, speaks to you as being most important in order to preserve the democratic ideals of what this country was founded on. Which one or two of these values? I want to just, my goal is that you'll actually move out of your seats and talk to some people with your masks on. And I want to remind you that you'll be talking to people who have very different political points of view than you may have. This is not intended as a political conversation. This is intended as a respectful conversation for people to talk about the values that you think are most essential to preserve democracy. So that's the goal. Now what I'm going to do for those of you who are watching on the Zoom, and I haven't done this on a Shabbat before, is that we're going to share the screen so you'll have the text to be able to look at. This all goes according to plan. So hopefully if you're on the Zoom right now in just about 5 seconds, you will see the text of what we are going to be sharing together. Voila. So before we begin, I want to offer the prayer, and then Tzvi, Jack, and Yona, would you guys be comfortable being our readers of these quotes? So there are 18 quotes, and there are 3 of you. If we divide it by 3, we get 6 each. So if you'll come up in just a minute, we'll have each one of you read 6 at a time slowly. You'll just read one, pause for a little bit, let people absorb it, go to the next one, and you'll read our 18 quotes. And then we're going to ask people to say, of all these 18, which are the values that you think are most crucial in order for a democracy to flourish? So the prayer for this moment, and these are basically, many of these sources are from a colleague of mine, Rabbi J.B. Sachs, but I want to begin with a bracha. May it be your will, O Holy One of blessing, as we recall the events of and surrounding January 6, 2021, that you may help us to become like our ancestor Aaron, who loved peace and pursued peace, By recalling January 6 and the values of our tradition, we commit to being full members of society, to accepting our individual responsibility for the good of the whole. May we place over ourselves officials in all our gates who will judge the people with righteousness. Open our eyes to see the image of God in all candidates and elected officials, and may they see the image of God in all of our citizens and all living and working here. May they see their mission to work together for the common good. May we all merit to be counted among those who work faithfully for the public good, and let us say, Amen. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to invite you guys to come up, and if you're comfortable, read the first 6 of these, and I'm going to try to make sure I can scroll for our people who are on Zoom so they can, and are you comfortable doing mics or not comfortable doing mics? Because people can't hear you without the mic. That's the problem. All right. So if you guys would rather not, I'm going to get people who are okay with mics, because I don't want to ask you to do something you're uncomfortable with halakhically, but people don't hear it on the Zoom unless they're speaking into the mic. All right. Jerry, are you willing? I need you to do the first, I'm going to have you do the first 3. Why don't you do it from the mic right over there? Okay?
Most quarrels are inevitable at the time, incredible afterwards. A fanatic is a person who does what they think God would do if only God knew the facts of the case. America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves.
Thank you. All right. Marge, would you be willing to read the next 3?
Some people believe they are thinking when they are only rearranging their prejudices. Who is a hero? The one who turns an enemy into a friend. A genuine conversation means stepping out of the I and knocking on the door of the you.
Thanks. John, could I ask you to read the next 3?
What is hateful to oneself, do not do to another. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. All of us in our present civilization are dependent upon one another to a degree never before known in human history. And in the long run, we are going to go up or down together. We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now.
Ivy, could I have you come and read the next 3?
If you don't believe in working together, watch what happens to a wagon when one wheel comes off. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel taught, the world rests on 3 things, on justice, on truth, and on peace. Rabbi Mona taught, these are one and the same. For if there is justice, there is truth. And if there is truth, there is peace. Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding.
Alan, could I invite you to read the next 3?
Two cheers for democracy, 1 because it admits variety, and 2 because it permits criticism. The opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is indifference. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Since the days of Greece and Rome, when the word citizen was a title of honor, we have often seen more emphasis put on the rights of citizenship than on its responsibilities.
And Elliot, could I ask you to do the last 3?
There is nothing wrong in America that can't be fixed with what is right in America. Civility is not a tactic or a sentiment. It is the determined choice of trust over cynicism, of community over chaos. The ancient Romans regarded bridge building as a sacred pursuit. That is evident from the name they gave to the priest whom they call pontifex, which means bridge builder. A bridge unites those whom nature divides. Can there be a more sacred function in life?
Okay. Thank you all for reading. So, as I said, my goal in this was to acknowledge the events of a year ago, but to frame it within a religious context in which we talk about values and what we think are the ultimately most crucial values that will preserve both democracy and freedom. And so what I would like to ask people to do is maybe we're going to spend 10 minutes doing this. You're going to go and just turn around and create small groups of about 5 or 6 people, maybe with people that you don't know, not even if you're sitting next to someone that you feel very comfortable with, and just have a conversation as you look through the sheet and say, okay, these are some beautiful quotes. I think most people can feel relatively that each of these quotes has some significance and meaning, but what do you think from a values perspective do we need to focus on as a country and as citizens of this country to preserve our democracy and freedom? And we'll come back and ask a few people to share. So spend some time, keep your masks on, of course, but find some people and have a conversation with some people. And again, I'm encouraging people to talk to people you may not even know so well, okay? All right, 10 minutes, here we go. Those of you who are on Zoom, the Cantor is going to try to create breakout rooms for you to have a conversation, and we'll copy the quotes and try to put that into the chat. My political conversation is not working. I can hear. All right, so that's one down. We're going to take about 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we're going to ask for a couple of comments for people if you want to share a value that you think is essential that came out of your conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to invite people to come back into your normal seats. So we want to just invite anyone who's on the Zoom to post anything that you would like to in chat. We're going to come out of our chat rooms. All right, we're going to end up, Chazan, if we can, if we can end the breakouts, can we, all right.
Yeah, we agreed to disagree. That is funny. All right.
So I want to just invite people, the exercise was to say, was there a value that you want to affirm, that you feel like is a value that is of all of these, that is an essential value in order to preserve democracy and freedom? That was the exercise. We want to invite people who are on the Zoom to write in the chat if there are any things that you felt were priorities in any of the conversations that you had. And again, I understand that there are people who feel like the whole nature of bringing quotes about January 6th was in itself a political statement, and I've talked to a few of you who feel like there have been lots of issues going on in the United States, not just January 6th, and that there may be other threats that are as serious as what happened on January 6th. So again, that was not my intent to make this into a political conversation. It was religious communities have to talk about values, and some values actually will touch on issues that people clearly that are expressed in political realms, but the goal of this conversation, at least as it was conceived, was to say, what are the values that we need as citizens of a country where there is this great diversity of who we are as citizens and as people? What do we need to keep this republic together? That was the question. And what are the values that are core to doing that? So I want to hear any feedback, and I'm going to take a look. All right, let's see. Anyone want to respond from your group? Maybe we'll put a mic out in front, because again, people can't hear unless we're talking into mics. So if you were willing to come up, speak into a mic. Thank you. And folks will see you if you're in that direction.
I'm going to go first because I think everybody here agrees with us. And we're just going to go right to the basics and say Hillel knew it all, and he was right from the very beginning. The golden rule is the rule.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share something from your group that you felt was the essential value? Rob, come on up.
Okay, so this was not one of the ones that we actually read out loud to each other that pushed us into a conversation that we actually got off on a tangent about anti-Semitism. But I think that what sums up our discussion was the opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is indifference. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And we got into a discussion about how all of us need to participate in the democracy, and and not just sit back and say somebody else will do it.
Thank you, Robin. I want to just read something that Harry Leibson posted in chat. He wrote, "Agree to disagree and allow one to express their opinions freely." Agree to disagree. The goal is not to convince someone else that you're right. The goal is to hear someone, to be advocates of your perspective, but to agree to disagree when there are differences. Okay? Anyone else want to share? Steve, I saw your hand, and then Renee.
this is one I liked, and I think the other members of the group did also. We may have all come on different, this is Martin Luther King, we may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. The idea of thinking ourselves as sort of a group, as Americans. We shared values, we shared experiences and shared dangers, all of us, regardless of our point of view, to be unified as a sort of the primary way of thinking.
Unity. Okay, Renee, you're next, and then Devorah, it looks like.
Our group looked at a lot of the sayings and said the common thing is people have to actually make the effort to listen and to understand other people's points of view and open their eyes and consider, various experts in different fields, but not everybody is always right. You have to consider the other person's argument.
Thank you, Renee. Devorah? And then we're going to take one or two more, and we're going to go to Musaf.
I will speak as the odd person out in this. I think that the problems are not problems of lack of understanding. I think first of all, in Judaism, there's two traditions. There's the tradition of Aaron, which is to make peace, and there's the tradition of Moses, which is to stand up for what's right. And at times, the standing up for what's right has fallen in terms of the making peace. And we've reached a society where we feel that people don't have to even follow things that do with science. They don't have to respect the truth. That we can have lies that have been running for over a year about the election. We've had the anti-vaxxers coming up with fantastic theories of all this anti-science, things that are just totally backward, that are against the whole of civilization for thousands of years. And no, you can't make peace with it. There are times where there's right and wrong, and that's it.
Devorah, thank you. And let me read someone who probably, I think this was directed to me, but I think it would probably be a response maybe also to Devorah, what you just said. I think this is Don who wrote, January 6th was a despicable riot, but to say that the transition of power was threatened, as you said, Rabbi, was a political statement and opinion and not a fact. Some people say, let me read it again. January 6th was a despicable riot, but to say that the transition of power was threatened, as you said it, Rabbi, was a political statement and opinion and not a fact that I greatly disagree with that and found it an inappropriate way to start the conversation. So, okay, so that there is a range of people's opinions about what January 6th meant and represented in this community and certainly in this country. Everyone agrees that January 6th was not a wonderful day, but whether or not people will use the language to say that it threatened the peaceful transfer of power, as I said, because I believe that to be true, or others would say it did not threaten the peaceful transfer of power. There were just a few people who got out of hand in it was not a good situation, but some people got out of hand. That was not a threat to the Republic. That was just expressed by Don. And so my framing what I viewed as a threat to the peaceful transfer of power is what I take to be a fact, but others take to be opinions. And that whole question of what is, and that was what Devorah, I think, was asking, how does a society that can't agree on what is fact, how does a society in which there is profound disagreement, not of opinions of points of view, but opinions about what is factual, that's where my fear comes from. We cannot, as a country, agree on what is fact.
A fact is something which is definitely true
So Myron is saying, for those of you at home, Myron is saying that many opinions are put out as facts.
The people who took part in that riot if they were intending to overpower the government, they must have forgotten their guns and rifles.
Okay, so.
Too many armed insurrections succeed.
Okay, so people are saying that the focus on January 6th is an overblown response to something that was mostly some rioters who got out of hand. And and to say that it was a threat to democracy, as I say, is an opinion. The line between what is opinion and what is fact is, and again, the question, and people brought up the vaccine. The vaccine is a perfect example of the question of fact and opinion being very blurry. Because most people who are in the fields of science will tell you specifically that the vaccinations will protect you against getting serious cases of COVID, that the concerns about things that we may not yet know about it and how damaging this can be are very much overblown, and that from a public health perspective, we should all be vaccinated as a way of protecting each other and protecting ourselves. That is presented generally by the scientific community as fact. We know that there are many people who hear that and do not believe that is fact. So the line between what is fact and what is opinion has gotten very blurry. And I agree that to me, that's why the quote that has to do about emet, truth, to me, of all of these quotes, if there is truth, there is peace. That's the quote from Rabbi Mona on source 11. And the question of when we can come to understand that we have a consensus of what is true and a commitment to civility and respectful disagreement, those two elements to me are what is necessary for a society to flourish. And to me, the fear that I have is that we don't have the ability to agree on what is true. And we certainly don't have the ability to respectfully disagree with one another. We have become a very angry country. So my goal in bringing this together was, again, to acknowledge that there are differences of opinion and people who have principled disagreements with each other, who should be heard and respected, even if I, as a rabbi of this community, tried to frame a conversation around values so that it would not be a partisan conversation. That was my goal. It was to allow values and the question of freedom to be at the center of this conversation. So that was my goal today. I think that if we can't ever talk about issues that are of ultimate importance that relate to our society, that sometimes have political ramifications, then we can just, there's an elephant in the room. I think as a rabbi, I want to say that it is absolutely inappropriate for a rabbi to speak as a partisan political, to speak from a partisan political punditry perspective. That is absolutely inappropriate. And to the extent that some of you hear me as being partisan, I apologize. That is never my goal. My goal is to raise issues, concerns, values, and frame them in a Jewish and a religious context for us to consider. And I will continue to do that, even though I know that there are some people who are very upset in the the implied politics of things. So again, my goal is values. My goal is to what we as Jews, and the fact that we live in a country of which we are citizens, and sometimes those issues need to be spoken about in our religious communities. So I want to thank you for talking to one another. I want to thank you for the respectful conversation that people had. And again, for those of you who felt that it was not appropriate or it was overly partisan, I hope that you will understand at least my thinking in bringing it to each and every one of us. Shabbat Shalom. Bruchim to you. Chazan, we're going to go to Musaf, page 155. The Chatzi Kaddish will invite you to rise.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בלמד יברכירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. ישמר רבה מבורך לעולם מולל מעמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפואר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו אלא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ביעלמה ויאמרו אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל העליון גומל חסדים הטובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעם אדוני מקיים את אימת הרב להושיע משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם מקלקל חיים בחסד מקיים מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ברופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מי כמוך על גבורות ומי לא מלך מלך ממית ומקיים ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן לך חיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני בחיי המתים.
שרפי קודש המקדישים שמך בקודש ככתוב נלך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר
נעריצך ונקדישך כשול שיח שרפי קודש המקדישים שמך בקודש ככתוב בנביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו.
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. כבודו מלא עולם משרתיו שואלים זה לזה. הייני מקום כבודו לעומתם ברוך יאמרו
ברוך כבוד אדוני
ברוך אדוני ממקומו ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים ויחד המייחדים שמו ערב בבוקר וכל יום תמיד פעמיים בימה שמע אומרים
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Avinu Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu Vehu Hu Yashmienu Yashmienu Berachamav Shenit 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 Yene Kol Chai V'yot Lachem Lelohim
Ani Adonai Elohechem
Ani Adonai Elohechem ובדרכו כתוב לאמור
ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור הללויה
ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור הללויה לדור ודור נגיד גודלך לדור ודור נגיד גודלך ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושיבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. תיקנת שבת אז מסיני נצטוו עליך קראו יהי רצון לפניך אלוהינו ואת מוסף יום השבת הזה עשו לקריב בפניך בהבוק כאמור ביום השבת שני כבשים בשבתו עללת לתמיד ונזכר
עולת שבת בשבתו עולת התמיד ונזכר יסמכו אותך ושם נשארה בכל העון אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מצווים אבותינו ומצוותיך ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ברוך אתה אדוני הטוב שמך לכנו להודות שים שלום טובה וברכה חן בחסד רחמים ברכנו ונוכל לך בוא בניך משחק ברכה ורחמים וחן ושלום Those of you who are still davening, please continue to do so. Those of you who have concluded, turn ahead with us to page 181, Kaddish Shalem.
יתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברי קירותי והמלך מלכותי בחייכון ומכון נפקד כל בית ישראל בגלה זכריו ואמרו אמן שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ותרומם ותנשא ותהדר ותלך ותהלל לשמי דקודשה בריחו לאלוהים ולכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ולמה ואמרו אמן תתקבל צדקון ובאותכון בכל ישראל קודמו ונשמעי ואמרו אמן יהי שלום רבה בן שמעיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום ממרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
We invite you to rise as we continue page 183 with Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי ארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך ומלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. שעון שמיים וישראל הוא אלוהינו אין עוד מועד. בשמיים מעל ועל ארץ מתחת. על כן לפניך אדוני אלוהינו. ככתוב בתורתך אדוני מלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
We invite those in the process of mourning or observing a yahrzeit to remain standing as we continue page 184, Kaddish Atom. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yalma divrach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'yimru. Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevorach li'olam omei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal Shemei dekudasha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata. Damiran bi'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. We ask God who brings peace and comfort on high to bring peace and comfort to those of you who are remembering your loved ones. So we want to again say Shabbat Shalom and welcome to all of you. Joe, do you know if there are to-go lunches that are out there? Okay. So again, some of you may not feel comfortable eating together, so there are lunches packed for you to go if you would prefer to take them with you. But you are welcome, obviously, to stay and join together in having lunch together in the Fishman Auditorium. The Cantor will lead us in Kiddush and Motzi. I'm going to take these three young folks up to see the main sanctuary because there are a few of them who have not ever seen it before. So I'm going to take them on a quick tour, and I'll see you in a few minutes after the end of the service. I want to thank Jeff for reading Torah this morning. I want to say Mazal Tov to Steve on chanting Haftarah on the 66th anniversary. Wow. Yeah. Well, you are a young 66 plus our math. Yeah. So Yasher Koach. Did I miss anyone else who read Torah besides Jeff and Steve and obviously Chazan for reading Torah for us again this morning? A couple of announcements just to make you aware of. We do want to ask you to please update your COVID card with your booster shot as of February 1. We're going to say that the definition of being vaccinated is that you have had a booster. So we hope that you will do that and get that to Stacy Salzman. Monday through Friday morning minyan takes place in this room in person as well as on Zoom. We invite you to join us for some wonderful Torah that's being taught. Carol Nemiroff does mindfulness on both Wednesday morning and Monday nights. I'm teaching a wonderful, wonderful Hasidic commentary on the Parasha of the Sfat Emet. That's Tuesday at 8.
The Sisterhood has a wonderful program featuring our own Dr. Steve Shapiro and Adam Suker, and who will be talking about updating COVID-19 issues for the community. You can still participate in that and join in the Cantor's class, who's going to do it a little bit later on Wednesday night at 8:30 on the history of Tefillah. And we invite you on Monday the 17th for MLK Day to make blankets for kids who are in hospitals. We are sponsored by our Mitzvah, our social action group, and that will be done virtually only, again, as a precaution in terms of bringing people together. That was the wishes of most of the participants, that it be done on Zoom. So that's Monday the 17th on Zoom, and we look forward to seeing you at many. Oh, and Tu B'Shvat is not, for whatever reason, it's not on my list. I'm just reading what was given to me. So we have a wonderful program Monday night of Tu B'Shvat the 17th. Right, so Gadi.
So please register online, and it's all on Zoom.
Thank you, Ivy. It should have been on my list, but it was not. We have a wonderful Tu B'Shvat program for people to connect to the land of Israel and the state of Israel. Monday and Tuesday, the 17th and 18th. All right, we are going to conclude Chazan, Adon Olam, page 187.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra V'yed Nasa V'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora Vehu haya vehu hove vehu yeh betifara vehu echad v'yein sheni להשאיר לו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה והוא אלי וחי גואלי וזור חבלי בעת הצרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנהל כוסי ביום אקרא ידו הפקיד רוחי בעת ישן והעירה ועם רוחי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא יירא.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi, Cantor, see you next week.
Joe, Val, good to see you. Go Birds. Shabbat Shalom, Steve. Myron, Shabbat Shalom.
I never challenge your goals. I never assume
No, I
evil.
understand.
But just look. Is the mic on or off?
Well, the mic is on here.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.